name is Kadeesha Williams. I'm the community horticulturist for Bronx Green Up at the New York Botanical Garden, and today we're going to transplant some starts and plant some seeds. The first thing you want to do when planting seeds or putting in some transplants is prepare your soil. I have my rake here, and what I'm trying to do is make sure the soil is level and fluffy. We want the soil to remain fluffy because we want the roots to have an easy time spreading out in the bed, especially for seeds. When we plant seeds in the soil, we don't want them to have a hard time making their way down, the roots that is. We don't want them to have a hard time making their way down, so we want to keep the soil fluffy. Now, why make the bed level? Well, when it rains and when we water, we want the bed to absorb water easily and evenly. And if there are dips and valleys in the soil, like in nature, the water will run down the hill into the valleys and leave the peaks dry. So leveling it out makes it easier for the bed to absorb water more evenly. It's kind of a soil finesse, gently raking down the hills into the valleys and not so much dragging the soil. And if there are any big chunks of material left over, like these plant roots here, you can move those to your compost. Today, we're planting Swiss chard, a highly nutritious vegetable crop in the beet and spinach family. Swiss chard is a long season leafy green, so we need a plan. If you're ever curious about how much space your plants need, one way you can find that out is to look on the seed packet. In rows 18 inches apart, Swiss chard plants should be at least a foot apart. So what I'm going to do is make my rows a foot apart and then make sure each plant within those rows is 18 inches apart or so. I'm using the tip or the back of the handle of my rake to make my rows. But you can use your hand, a stick, or another tool if you want to. As you drag the tool long ways down your bed or down your growing area, you want to make sure you're doing this lightly. Again, we don't want to press down on the soil. Try to keep it as straight as possible, but don't worry if it's not perfect. It doesn't need to be. The best time to transplant is when you're in partial shade or if it's overcast, because once you expose the plant's roots to the light, they become a little bit stressed. Another way to prevent that stress is to make sure you water your starts before you transplant them. This is going to give them an opportunity to be insulated with water. They have food, they know it's going to be okay. You can talk to them if you like. I do that sometimes. Now that we have our grid, our 3 rows, I want to place my already watered transplants down. And the reason I'm placing them down before I dig them into the ground is to make sure they're spaced out properly. There are a couple ways to work your starts out of their cells. You can weave your hands into the tray so that they're supported, flip it over, and gently squeeze the bottoms or tap the bottoms to get them to come out. Another way you can do that is to lift them up by a leaf, gently and slowly until they come loose. You never want to pull the stem because a plant can grow another leaf, but they can't grow another stem. If you break the stem, that's it. Now that I've got my Swiss chard spaced out, I have a trowel that I'm going to use to dig some holes. What you want to make sure is that your cells or your transplants go deep enough that the stem is no longer exposed or the top of the cell's soil is no longer exposed. So you want this to be just below the soil level so it looks like it was always there. So I'm going to dig my hole, not so deep that they fall deep down in the ground, but just so they're deep enough that the stem or the root part of the stem is buried. And then, without making pressure, I'm going to fold in soil around that, holding the plant up so that it salutes the sun. If it's too deep, the new leaves in the center of your plant will have a hard time coming up. And if it's not saluting the sun, facing straight up like this, then they'll grow funny, trying to reach for the sun. You might notice when purchasing starts, or if your starts have been in their trays for a really long time, that the roots are bound. That is to say, they've wrapped around the cell a few times because they have nowhere else to go. If that's the case, you want to gently break up your roots before putting them in the ground. This is going to encourage them to grow outward now and to stop wrapping around itself. Once you loosen the roots, you'll plant it the same way you do a cell that's not root bound. Sometimes you'll get cells that have multiple starts in them. Don't be shy. Just gently break them apart the same way you would loosen up a cell that's root bound. No trowel? No problem. The good thing about making your soil surface so fluffy is that you can actually make a hole pretty easily with your hands. You're going to grab the start like you would normally before you drop it into the hole. Use 3 or 4 fingers to gently push down into the soil and then pull that to the side. Drop your start in and then let the soil fall back around the roots. Now you notice I pressed down a little bit on the soil just to give a little bit more support for the starts. You don't have to do that, but some people do, and that's okay too. Just a little bit of pressure. If you look at the 3 rows we have in our bed, you might notice that the rows are not in a grid, or rather the plants are offset from each other. This is a technique I use to make sure that the plants themselves have more than a foot of space between each other. So the rows themselves might be a foot, but from this plant to this plant, it's a little bit further, which gives them more growing space. When you think about your plant bed as a grid, you're really thinking about how much space each plant is going to use. And if you offset the rows, you're going to be able to squeeze more in there while also maintaining the space they need to flourish. I have my rows continuing from my Swiss Chard starts. But since we're already in the growing season, I can plant these for my second round directly from seed in the ground. If you want to know how deep your seeds should be, check the back of your seed packet. For Swiss Chard, the depth is about 1/2 inch. I've already pre-dug 3 1/2-inch deep holes, so now I'm ready for my seeds. I'm going to pour a couple of seeds into my hands, not the whole packet. The reason for that is water is one of the activating things for seeds. When you place warm water with your seeds, or you get your seeds wet and put them in a warm place, they begin to germinate or they begin to come alive. So in order to prevent accidentally germinating seeds, I'm only going to put a couple in my hand, about as many as I need for each hole. In each hole, I'm going to put 2 to 3 seeds. Now, of course, that's more than you need, but I want to guarantee a Swiss chard comes up in this spot. When they start to germinate, when they start to come up, if there are too many, you can always pluck 2 of them out, making room for the one that you want. And those 2 that you pluck, you can always eat. Now that I have my seeds in the hole, I'm going to gently cover them back up. To remind yourself and others that there's something planted here, you want to make some labels. My label has today's date and what I'm growing. Last but certainly not least, you need to water your starts. Again, transplanting is kind of stressful for starts, and adding water kind of calms them down and lets them know everything's going to be okay. They have what they need to thrive. You also want to water your seeds because you need water to help the germination process. So I'm going to do that here. To water, I want to make sure water goes directly around the stem of the plants that we started. Now, some people water their whole plot, and that's okay. But if you want to use water wisely, you can focus your water distribution just to your starts, and you'll save some water. And there you have it. My name is Kadeesha Williams. I'm the community horticulturist for Bronx Green Up at the New York Botanical Garden, and this has been Direct Sow and Transplant.